the price of building AI today is, I would say, reasonable. But I think the cost of not having built AI could be exponential in the next few years. If I was leading a business that is data-centered, here's what I would do to keep up.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Generation AI podcast, episode number 3, where every week we break down the latest trends, tools, and strategies in AI. So if you're building and you're looking to separate the signal from the noise, this is the podcast for you. Mihai, from a scale of 1 to pumped, how are you feeling?
Same answer as last week. I feel like we learned a lot, and I'm very excited. We find new topics every week to discuss on. We have new ideas. It's just our 3rd episode, and I feel like we already learned quite some things about how to find relevant topics, how to present them in a podcast. So very excited. What about you?
So much is happening, right? So much is happening every week, every day. These models seem to get better. The use cases are growing. So if you are actually thinking about how to utilize strategies for AI, how to build AI-first products, I think this is probably the best time to possibly be doing it, wouldn't you say?
Exactly, and we'll speak about this later in the podcast. We feel that there's a bunch of trains in AI to be caught at the moment, and if you're not jumping in the right train, the cost of not doing so in a few years might be quite high. So we'll explain this in a bit, why investing in AI is important at the moment, and if you're not investing in AI, at least understanding what it is and how it can help you.
Cool. So what do we have coming up on the show today? Maybe we would just take a quick 30 seconds to go through the key topics that we want to discuss.
For sure. So first of all, we'll talk about building AI where it makes most sense. We often talk about rocket science when it comes to AI. That's important because this is how we improve the industry. But sometimes AI can be applied in, let's say, boring ways. But as long as they provide value to the user, those are good applications of AI. This will be the first topic. Then we'll be talking about 11 Labs raising a Series C, and we'll speak about why this is relevant and how it compares to what our competitors are doing. Next, we'll talk about how to keep up with AI agents, and we'll stress the speed of things moving nowadays.
Cool. Sounds like a good summary of what we want to go through today. You discussed obviously the need to build AI features and I suppose making the most of the applications that are available today. But what's your take in terms of the use cases and the development of AI right now?
I think there's two schools of thought when it comes to AI. There's people who are trying to push the boundaries. And we've seen that in research and on frontier research where people are building the next models, people are trying to find the next best thing, let's call it rocket science in AI. And there's the second side where people are just trying to implement very straightforward, maybe boring AI methods, AI machine learning, data science methods, where users already spend time and where data is already being moved from one side to the other. And there's 2 examples, relevant examples from the industry to strengthen this point. On one hand, we've all heard about WhatsApp. We all probably have it in our pockets, and we spend quite some time every day in WhatsApp. It's a very simple app if you think about it. Meta introduces an AI agent in WhatsApp, and the goal is to basically help you digest information faster, communicate easier with people, and basically spend less time being productive in the same way. Second, Opera. For people who don't know, Opera is basically another Chrome. It's a web browser, introduces an AI agent. The goal is basically help users navigate the web faster, more productive, understand the information they see, be proactive on the queries that they're about to search for, and a range of different small tasks linked to productivity. And the thing that excites me about this is that about both topics, first of all, you have AI on device and on the app. And second of all, you have AI in your control, because once you have an AI agent in WhatsApp or in your web browser, all of a sudden the information doesn't go away to third parties like OpenAI, presumably. It stays within the same ecosystem, and you have at least a bit more control over your data. How do you feel about this? Do they seem boring to you, this kind of use cases?
I don't really understand the use case, to be honest. So maybe just give the audience a flavor of how it works, because we've used the term AI agent quite a lot, but what's the actual use case here?
The goal here is for the user probably not to feel like they're interacting with an AI. The user doesn't need to know that, hey, an AI agent is being used behind the scenes. The goal for the user is to open the phone, tap on the AI widget from WhatsApp, have the widget look at their screen, summarize what is on the screen, summarize information, and basically help you convey information to the people you already speak to in WhatsApp faster. Summarize conversations, summarize thoughts, stay up to date with what's happening in your chats, I assume.
Okay, so just in a nutshell, why do you think this is important?
When I'm using WhatsApp, I don't want to spend 10 minutes on WhatsApp. I want to communicate with people. And if I can reach the goal faster, I'm perfectly happy. So the goal is not to spend time on the app. The goal is to communicate with people. And if there's a bunch of AI agents behind the hood that help me communicate faster and more effectively, I'm perfectly happy to use this kind of features. So I think it boils down to getting the job done faster and not spending more time on the app, for example. And the same goes with Opera and web browsing. Let's say, of course, we talk all the time about all these flashy language models, image generation models, Gen AI, and so on. But what if there's a simple classification model that basically computes the probability that you're going to browse a link or news on the internet? And based on that, it ranks the things you see based on the likelihood you have to read them. It's a simple use case, right? It can be extremely effective given that there's a ton of noise on the internet nowadays.
Okay, so your point here is more around the fact that there are simple AI use cases that can be deployed easily, and not everything has to be big bang, right?
Exactly. This is why I said, of course, I support the advancements in research, but I think there's so many companies, let's say, under-digitalized that even a simple AI agent or a simple AI model applied where the user spent already time or applied where data is already flowing can deliver almost instant ROI. It doesn't have to be huge and flashy.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I mean, like any point in the AI adoption curve, right? Everything is always in the beginning. Everything is always overhyped, and the sentiment and the narrative runs ahead of the reality. And often, the most simple use cases are the most valuable in the beginning. That said, I still think we're looking at platform shift changes here. So if you compare it to the early days of the internet, Google, I think, was the 24th search engine. So there are really obvious, massive platform changes that are occurring. But I agree, for the average company, there are probably much simpler ways that they can be adopting AI today, whether it's enabling workflows, whether it's putting together processes to enable LLMs to retrieve data and surface information to customers and employees. These are relatively simple things that you can do by plugging into, the API of an LLM, by training it on your data. These things are not as complicated as you would think. And a lot of the time, it's about starting out, as you say, with those simple use cases.
And there's platforms out there that help you as a non-tech person do this quite straightforward, right? There's make.com, there's Relevance AI. I've seen they can deliver quite interesting things. Have you played with them?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're exploring these platforms now, right? We are exploring these AI first platforms. A lot of them are using pre-built templates, so it's not even something that you have to do yourself necessarily. But it can be as simple as, you know, automating the sending of emails when a customer is interested in your product. Now, previously, I've worked with a number of email automation tools, and these tools can be very efficient in terms of their ability to send out a lot of emails to a lot of customers very quickly, but a lot of the time they're very ineffective because what they lack is context. So everybody gets the same email, essentially. They may have a different name, and it may be personalizing the email based on a particular parameter like name or company name. But essentially, this is a one-to-many communication, and everybody receives the same communication. What's fundamentally different about these LLM tools is that the audience can get an appreciation of context. So to put that into practical terms, you can train the LLM on all of your products and services so that it has an intuitive understanding of what you do and the value that you provide and the problem that you're solving. It can then go to the customer's website, research the customer's information, and then send on an email to that customer that's personalized to that individual based on an understanding of the problem you can solve for that particular company, based on an understanding of the company. So this is like 10x better than the email automation tool that is available today. And you can build this and do this without writing a single line of code.
Exactly. And what you just explained is basically the transition we've seen in the last years or so from rule-based automation to context-aware automation. So previously, you would just inject the name of the person and you call it a personalized email. Now you can research a person and really send a context-aware personalized message. This is the transition we've seen with agents.
Yeah.
What about we move to the next topic? What do we have?
Next up, I mean, this is, I suppose, about making the simple use cases intelligent, right? And making sure that we're taking advantage of the technology that we have already at our fingertips. So a really obvious example of that is using large language models in your business today, right? And when a lot of people think about how to use large language models, they're thinking about how to use written text. But 11 Labs are a great example of a company that is really understanding the value of LLMs and how to translate that value into audio specifically. So 11 Labs just raised their Series C round at a $3 billion valuation. Now, this was an oversubscribed round. Everyone that you would expect to be invested in this round was involved. It was an oversubscribed round. So you had the likes of Salesforce Ventures, HubSpot Ventures, Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia. It's basically the who's who of Silicon Valley investors, right? And that's because collectively, everyone understands the value that can be sought from audio-based AI. So for anyone that isn't familiar with 11 Labs and what they do, 11 Labs is a company that turn written-based text or LLM-based text into audio. So if you're calling into a contact center, for instance, you can now speak to an 11 Labs customer service agent in particular. It was a couple of weeks ago, it was announced that they would take all written books on Spotify and turn them into audio books. And the real great unlock that 11 Labs have enabled here is twofold. One is the voices sound human-like or as close to human beings as possible. So if you were speaking to an 11 Labs agent powered by an LLM, you would not know that you were speaking to AI. And secondly, the massive unlock here is language, or languages more to the point. So 11 Labs can speak in 20, or their agents can speak in 23 different languages. So the ability simply to turn all of the world's written information into audio is just a really clear and obvious example of the simple use cases that can be enabled via AI. And I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, I mean, what you just mentioned is very cool from a consumer point of view, because how do people communicate? It's mostly via voice, right? Even in this podcast, we speak to each other. So adding the voice layer on top of what already is quite useful is an obvious next step. And I'm not surprised that people invest in this kind of initiatives because, yeah, we've seen language models become the norm today. I expect the norm will be, in 1 year from now, voice everything. I'll be speaking to my phone, I'll be speaking to my laptop, I'll be coding through voice. And by the way, there's already, so we saw Cursor AI, and that's also a huge tool. I think it recently got a new round of investment. There's wrappers on top of Cursor AI where you can write through code. So you just stare at your screen, you think about the code, you speak out loud, and the cursor AI wrapper writes the code. And I think the number of languages is quite higher. I think it's 32. But anyways, it's impressive that we can have human-like voice from a language model. And what I like even more about this startup is that it's built in Europe. I know most of the innovation comes from the US, right? We have more and more startups in Europe. And you might be wondering, why did people invest in 11 labs where we already have OpenAI? And I think for multiple reasons. They might be competing with each other when it comes to language models and voice models. I just think OpenAI is at a different scale compared to 11 labs. I would make the comparison between the language model cloud providers and the classic cloud providers that we have on the market. So we have three big cloud providers, right? We have AWS, Azure, and GCP. But this doesn't mean that there's not room for smaller and more specialized cloud providers like DigitalOcean, right? That provide features in a different way. For example, AWS is the go-to cloud provider when you scale up and build really complex apps. DigitalOcean, for example, is my go-to cloud provider, for example, when I build POCs and apps that don't need to scale that much because it's easier to use, more clear pricing, and so on. And I'll make the same comparison here. OpenAI can easily become the big cloud provider for AI, where startups like 11 Labs can provide the niche use cases in a more specialized way at a higher quality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're still at a stage where we don't know. But if you look at how, let's say how SaaS developed, I think if you look at the way that SaaS developed, there wasn't one SaaS provider, right? Microsoft, even though they tried, they don't own the whole of SaaS. And actually, you actually have a really interesting comparison today, because you can go out and you can buy the best of breed solution in each area, right? And Microsoft is very rarely the best of breed solution in any area. In every single solution they have, other than maybe Microsoft Word and Excel, like Microsoft Office, nearly in every other category, their products are inferior to the best of breed provider, whether it's Slack or for messages, or Gong for call recording, single sign-on, Okta versus Microsoft. The list is endless, right? They will have an inferior product in every area, and companies can typically go one of two routes. They can use Microsoft for everything, and they will get a lower price, or they can take a best of breed approach and use the best technology in each area. And you'll typically find that most companies either go for a Microsoft heavy approach, where it's Microsoft for everything, or they go for a best of breed approach. Typically, more tech orientated companies will opt for a Microsoft Zero approach. And I think it will probably be the same here. I mean, it's not a binary situation. OpenAI will doubtless roll out their own voice products, and for some companies, and they will just use OpenAI for everything. Doubtless, there'll also be a best of breed AI community that technology first companies will also look to adopt those best of breed solutions.
I think to your point, I also prefer smaller, more specialized building blocks than the Microsoft suite. So for example, I like Slack as opposed to Microsoft Teams. But where I think Microsoft excels at is at the integration layers. The integration layer. They have Teams, they have OneDrive, they have all the Office products, and they all integrate together. And this is what I think OpenAI also does really well. They have the playground, they have all the language models, they have the whole billing platform united in a single place. You have the API access and so on, right? 11 Labs is more of a niche player. It's like the Slack compared to Teams, where Teams is OpenAI. It's more niche. And of course, they can co-live in the same environment. Just one does one vertical and maybe does it better.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's keep things moving. Moving on to the final topic of today's episode. keeping up with the developments around AI agents. Now, obviously, this was a key topic that you wanted to bring up, so I'm keen to get your take here. But clearly, we're now moving to a model where you can get OpenAI for $20 a month on the consumer level, right? The OpenAI are also moving into the B2B landscape, and I think this is where we'll start to see AI agents competing with human beings, quite frankly, in terms of the cost of these models and scaling them up to enterprise level. But maybe you're the best person to introduce this from this.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about simple and boring AI use cases that probably deliver a ton of value to the end user just because they're very targeted. We also talked about the latest and greatest in language models with 11 Labs. I'm happy with both directions, right? There have to be people who push the boundaries, as well as there have to be people who integrate the simple AI where it makes sense. But we're seeing quite a lot of hype in AI agents. And if you take a step back, maybe 5-6 months ago, there were a few articles that were rumoring the idea of AI agents and how nice and useful they can become. Fast forward to today, AI agents are no longer just hype. They're real, they're here, and they're getting expensive. We'll get to this in a second. The price of building AI today is, I would say, reasonable. But I think the cost of not having built AI could be exponential in the next few years. If I was leading a business that is data-centered, here's what I would do to keep up. I would try to build my data strategy in a way that when the AI will be inevitable, when I will need to use AI to keep my business alive, all the data is already there to be consumed by AI. And if I was building a business now and I didn't have a strategy around data or around AI, I would be slightly concerned. And the reason for that is 5-6 months ago, there was almost no AI agent around. Now we have startups building teams of AI agents. We've talked about Relevance AI. They're basically building teams of AI agents who can automate complex tasks, who have reasoning embedded in the product, who have self-reinforcement. So we're almost to the point where you specify the outcome you want to achieve and not the process anymore. And the agents figure out the process. How do you feel about this? I mean, you've played with these features. How are you using them as a non-tech user?
I mean, with the AI agents thing, I mean, Relevance AI is certainly an eye-opening platform in terms of what it can do, because I think how we've conceived of technology up until this point is that we have an IT team, right? And so as soon as you want to build something that essentially involves code, you need to either hire a third-party agency, or you need to go and have a call with your CTO or your CIO or your director of engineering, and you need to explain to them why they should take their engineering resources away from the projects they're working on and give it to your project, right? So often that's a political struggle, and essentially in every company, there's an undersupply of technical talent and demand for that technical talent and for writing code and building products that is far in excess of the supply of talent that's available. And so I think for the first time with these no-code and low-code AI platforms, we are removing potentially the IT bottleneck inside companies, where if you want to build something, and okay, let's say you don't want to scale it to 20 million customers, but if you want to go and build a POC and you're in the marketing department or you're in the sales department or the operations department and you think to yourself, if only we could just build X, you can now log on to Lovable, you can log on to Relevance AI, you can log on to Replit, and they will literally build these tools for you. Now, it's not perfect. No one's saying it's perfect, and we're still in the early days. But what we're witnessing is maybe the seeds of a fundamental change to the way that we build digital products and services. And I find it tremendously exciting.
And you said the normal model of building products is you hire people to do the job. Soon you'll be able to hire PhD level agents from OpenAI because they just announced, or at least they're thinking of building PhD level agents for just $20,000 a month, which is crazy, right? And we've talked about pricing.
Just $20,000.
Just 20,000, exactly. We've talked about pricing, and I mentioned AI is getting expensive. And we've seen this in the last few months. Initially, OpenAI was free. Then they rolled out the $20 per month plan that allows you that increases the limits of usage, allows you to upload documents and all the other modalities. The $20 plan is already super useful for the majority of people. Now we have a $200 per month plan that gives you more access to more features, more deep research tokens, because I was speaking about deep research in the last podcast and I was very hyped about it. It turns out that on the $20 per month plan, you only have 10 uses per month. And on the $200 plan, you have 120 per month. So you're still limited because it has to do research. It's expensive by default. But just imagine what a $20,000 per month PhD agent could do.
I mean, I think overall, the development continues to outpace what people are actually doing with it. So we'll see how things transpire over the next few months. But what I'm more focused on is not necessarily around the technology or the use cases, but how businesses can take advantage of these use cases. And right now I see a gap. I see a gap between what's possible and what is probable. And I think it's down to companies like Generation AI to close that gap, to actually take these use cases, put them into companies and make them real and get them to deliver ROI. But you can't help but not be excited, right? So looking forward to next week's podcast already. And thanks everyone for tuning in for today.
See you next week.